Oh, there's
Uh-uh.
and we have Billiam. Hello. Oh, he can't hear us yet. He's still connected. Oh, yes, he did hear us. Hello, Billiam. Good to see you, man. All right. We are going to be starting today on page 31. But before we do, here's your chance. This is your chance to speak out, upset the apple cart, redirect us, take a bunny trail, whatever you want to do. Is there anything that you've been thinking about, anything you'd like to discuss before we dive in?
Dave, I
Yeah.
can't see you guys, and should I hit the got it thing?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Video.
Thank you. Huh.
That was all you needed to do. See, you're figuring this stuff out. We just
Yay.
needed John to go on a concert and leave you alone. Necessity is the mother of invention. All right.
Only
Anything
comment
else, Jerry?
I'm gonna make is that I went back and read this conversation again before we got together, and I'm like, I'll never get there. When I read all these things that he could do, every moment of every day, and it's all about God, and I'm like, I'll never get there. How do you get there? That was my thought. It was like, wow, how does he get there? I mean, how do you get to where everything you do is always based on following God and what he would want, and I wrote down, it's all about God. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it for reward or to receive affirmations? And he didn't do any of that. He just always kept it focused on God. And it's like, how do you do that? How do you not focus on life and the news and, what's going on? I don't know. It was just one of those things when I was reading it, I'm like, well, I'm going to be a long time before I ever get there, if I ever get there. So how do you think he got there? I mean, was it just years of practice or what?
Well, yes, there were years of practice. There was a good 10 years when he first entered the monastery where he was struggling. The first 4, remember that he thought he was going straight to hell. And the next 6, he was resentful of being in the kitchen. But eventually he came to this place. He just stuck with it. He kept showing up day after day. Now, what the character of Brother Lawrence is that he was a pretty simple guy. Maybe there wasn't quite as many details flying around in his mind as there is in ours. He certainly didn't have the kinds of distractions that we have. And so, yes, there are some differences between his personal state and the circumstances that he was in that may have been more conducive to being able to go where he went. But make sure that you read between the lines, because he struggled as well. And in fact, some of the paragraphs we're going to be reading on this page 31 are telling us of the times that he was still struggling. He calls them temptations, but we're going to need to break that down into something that's maybe more relevant for us today, instead of what we think of as a temptation. But he was fighting these all the time. But he got to a point where he didn't worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
He just realized he was going to mess up. That's who he was, and left to his own devices, he was going to mess up. But he knew that whenever he did something right, it's because God was doing it through him, and that God was never going to hold it against him. And so he lost the shame and the fear that is often associated with our own fallibility and the mistakes we make. And he didn't have that anymore. So that's really, to me, the genius of Brother Lawrence. We don't want to try to look at him as some supernatural character that we could never attain to. And, however he is expressing this, his own experience of it may have been something more akin to what we experienced, but he's expressing it in a specific way. We just don't really know. We don't want to compare ourselves to him and put that kind of pressure on ourselves to try to be Brother Lawrence. I did that with Thomas Merton. It does not work very well. I wanted to be Thomas Merton, and it just doesn't work. Then you end up, as Thomas Merton said, making contemplative faces at yourself in the mirror, and that's not what this is about. But it is about looking at the principles that Brother Lawrence is laying out and apply those and see where you do get. You know, he said at the outset, remember, he said not everybody is going to get to a pure place of constant presence, practice of presence. But he said everybody can benefit from just practicing presence and see
Right.
where you do get. So it's progress, not perfection. That should resonate with you, Jerry, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Progress, not perfection. Just keep showing up and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Can I-
I had a friend over today, and we have different. We both have different viewpoints politically, and she's more more conservative, let's say. And I kept thinking of Brother Lawrence, and I was able to just keep saying, you know what, Kathy, I love you. I don't think we want to go there. I still love you. Even if I don't agree with you, I still love you. And I kept going there, and finally just kept saying, let's talk about the weather. We're so dramatically different politically, as well as she's much more evangelical than I am. But I just kept love in the forefront, you know, from reading this stuff. And I was telling her about this book. I think she might, I think I might have her convinced to join us next week. I thought I was going to get her on tonight, but it doesn't look like she came on. But I did practice the presence of God while we were starting to go that way. And I said, no, let's not go there.
No, think about that, Jerry. Think about how much better you did in relationship with her this time around than you have a few months ago or a few years ago. So
right.
that's the
Yeah.
I
process.
wanted to lecture and say, how could you possibly support that person? But I didn't. I
For you.
didn't.
Jerry,
Yeah.
I have a question. When you said that, I loved what you just said and how you handled your friend with love. But my question is, what if there's nowhere to go? What if you're exactly where you are to be?
I'm not sure I understand, Patricia. What do you mean not?
Well, you said you're not there yet.
Oh. Well, I mean, you know, if you read every one of these, that our thoughts, you know, spoil everything, that the beginning is often spent, you know, I mean, it was all those things that he listed in this conversation of being present with God at all times, you know, not getting caught up in our thoughts, you know, that's the mortification and all that. That's what I meant by, I can't say that everything I do is God's will, or I can't say that everything I think through, I ask God first, or that I'm praying nonstop every day, because I'm not. You know, I do talk to God on a pretty regular basis, but I consider it more, you know, I talk to God all the time. But to say that I don't get jealous, I don't get envious, to say I don't get judgmental, to say I don't criticize, nah, I can't say that.
Well, and it's okay to be human sometimes too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's okay to be human all the time because that's what we are. You might as well
You
ask.
know,
right.
Right?
You know?
That's part of this human experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that saying, you know, we're spiritual being, you know.
And also,
what is it?
Jerry, think about
Yeah.
this. Your emotions are not on you in terms of you're not responsible for your emotions because you don't have any control over them. They just pop up the way they do, unbidden, you know. And so if you don't have any control, then you can't also carry the shame or the blame for them. But what you do have control over is what you do with those emotions. And so you, discretion being the better part of valor, you didn't act on what you were feeling. And I've said this, I know many times, your spiritual progress is going to be measured not by how many times you're triggered by these negative emotions, but your recovery time to get back to center. Because the first thing that you're going to notice is you are recovering and coming back to center quicker and quicker. That's the first thing you notice. And then you start to notice the triggers starting to space out and not be as intense. But the first thing is your recovery time. And if you look back, man, if someone crossed you, it would be weeks of simmering, right? And now maybe it's hours. And that's what I'm talking about. That recovery time is everything. It tells you what you need to know. about
Yeah.
being on the process.
That is
And I,
so
and I
true.
guarantee you, Brother Lawrence's stone was not smooth either.
That is so true, because more than 4 years ago, if somebody had said the T word, I would have been down their throat. And now I just change the subject. Yes, I am making progress.
Jerry, can I add something too? I've been
Yes.
playing catch up on because I've missed several of our sessions, and I was listening in on the April 6th. I guess it's dated April 6th recording, and it was the one where Beth and Brady and Becky were there, and there was some discussion about all. A lot of us were struggling with, well, wait a minute, what this whole thing about feelings and how this fits with that. And there was a discussion about that, and I think I remember one of the points that I think William made in conjunction with Kathy's point, I think, is that our Enneagram profile might also lend ourselves to different ways of experiencing God. And I found that recording very helpful. I don't know if I couldn't see the pictures really well enough to see if you were there or not, but you might want to check that recording out, because I found it really helpful. And there was a pretty active discussion for sure.
I remember that one. Yeah.
I bet you do. It was pretty good.
That's great. That's great.
So
Thank
I
you.
offered that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is all good stuff because this is real world. If we're really going to be able to use Brother Lawrence as a model for ourselves, we have to get him into the right context and get ourselves into the same ballpark. We're all human beings. We're all dealing with the same thing. He wasn't immune to certain things, even if it may sound that way in the language that we're reading. That's why I'm always trying to break down the language, right? Let's break it down. Let's put it into what we're experiencing now, because I guarantee you that's what he was experiencing as well. They just call it different things, and they have a different register that they're using as they speak and write. So we're trying to deconstruct, bring it down, make it relevant so that we can kind of know what the next steps are supposed to be and be realistic about it. So in this second conversation, he has been going through the mortifications over the last page and a half or so. And he finally got to the point in the top of 31 where he finally said that, it's not about the mortifications. It's not about all these rituals. It's not about trying to experience pain in order to get closer to God. It's still about love. And that middle paragraph, that all possible mortifications would not erase a single sin if divorced from the love of God. So he's coming back down to the crux of it, down to the heart of it. Even though he had to take a detour through all of that Catholic culture, especially medieval Catholic culture, or at least Enlightenment era Catholic culture, he's coming down to the heart of it and coming down to the fact that it's just all about love. So then he carries on in the next paragraph that he gave no thought to death, nor to his sins, nor to paradise, nor to hell, but only to doing little things for the love of God, since he was incapable of doing great things. There's that humility again. That whatever happened to him after that would not bother him, since it was God's will. Now think about that for a second, what he's talking about. I mean, even though he still sees himself as completely fallible, completely human, he sees himself messing up all the time, he doesn't worry about it. He's gotten to the point where he is so immersed in this degreeless love of God, he sees it as completely perfect, that he doesn't have to worry about death, sins, paradise, hell, but only continue to show up every day, get up and do the little things that he does in the kitchen or in his cobbler shop, or when he's been sent to go buy wine, just do the little things that he does all day long, but connected to this love of God. And he doesn't worry about it. And this last line is kind of striking because What he seems to be talking about is hell itself, that whatever happened to him after that would not bother him since it was God's will. So he's not even worried if he ends up in hell because, as he says in another place, it would be transformed into a paradise by the presence of his God, because he sees God as being everywhere, even hell. So he's not worried about that. And that idea of continuing to do little things because he's incapable of doing big things is echoed by Mother Teresa in one of her most famous quotes. You may have heard it. She says, "We cannot do great things for God. We can only do little things with great love." Same idea here, you know? It's not about doing the spectacular things. It's about showing up day after day and doing the little things. In the Beatitudes, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," right? They would be called sons of God. And when we think of a peacemaker, we think of someone who rides in on the white horse and breaks up the conflict, right? And restores peace in terms of the absence of conflict to a situation or a group of people. But when you break down the Aramaic, what that word really means, it carries the images of again, a gardener or a farmer, someone who is bent over the earth and just showing up day after day and doing the tiny little things that make the plants grow, tending them day after day, showing up absolutely invisible to everybody else, not looking for reward, just showing up and do what they do. That is what the peacemaker really is all about if we take a look at it from that Aramaic point of view. Same thing that's going on here. You know, we were just talking, you know, Jerry saying, how do I get there to this seemingly spectacular place that Brother Lawrence occupied? But he wasn't thinking about the spectacular place. He was just thinking about turning the cake in the pan, but doing it for the love of God, picking up the straw off the ground, but doing it for the love of God, hammering the next nail on the sole of the shoe, but doing it for the love of God. Very different mindset, but one that we need to start to come to grips with if we're not going to drive ourselves crazy trying to do this. Right?
Yes.
The greatest pains and joys of the world could not be compared with those he had often experienced in the spiritual life. And so he was concerned about nothing and feared nothing, asking of God only one thing, that he not offend him. Again, interesting.
Yeah.
They're talking about the highs and lows of life, the traumas, the difficulties that we face. You know, he's talking about that since he's experienced those, they could not even be compared with what he's experienced in the spiritual life. In other words, what comes in from the outside in can't compare with what comes from the inside out. That the deepest connection, the deepest, even serenity, is going to come from the inside out. It's part of that spiritual life. And so the pains and joys of situations and circumstances and outward circumstances really don't bother him anymore, because he's got this ballast, he's got this kind of balance, you know, an equilibrium, that the pressure of what's coming from inside out is balancing what's coming from outside in. And he finds himself in this place. But I do want to try to make sure that we don't think that he was talking about being in a state of ecstasy all the time. You know, that did happen for him, but that's not, I don't believe that's what he's talking about here. It's almost kind of a dark serenity, because he still has this Catholic kind of guilt placed around it. But at the same time, it's a sense of serenity, a sense of contentment, a sense of okayness, that everything is going to be okay, but not necessarily ecstasy. And so we got to be careful when we hear him, you know, spouting off like this, you know, through Beaufort, that we don't imagine him always on cloud nine. Now, he was on cloud nine from time to time, and we're going to find out that Brother Lawrence was kind of a charismatic, right? I wish Danielle was here, because we're going to get to her happy dance, you know, her ecstatic dancing here on the next page. But at any rate, he did have those moments, but they were just moments. They weren't his everyday experience.
Dave, I'd like to interject here that my thoughts in these last two paragraphs, what I gleaned from that was the fact that he had risen above the dogma, if you will, the dogmas of the church, and he went beyond that and had a direct relationship with God to please God, and the pleasure he got from pleasing God was pleasing to him. And that goes back to the thing that has just touched my soul, in that where he says that, you know, if he that, you know, he wanted his actions to be prayer, not just words.
Mhm. That's great, John. I love that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I want to add a comment to that last sentence, desiring only one thing, that he might not offend him. To me, my view of God is like, when I do something, I don't see that it's offensive to God. You know what you're also saying, be unoffendable. I think God will not be offended. It's more like, oh, hey, Ellen, come back. You were wayward. Come back. So I see it as that, rather than it's offensive. Because to me, offensive gives me a feeling that, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? And there's that fear of that little child, fearful. Oh, did I offend my parent? Did I offend my teacher? But it's more like, come back.
Mhm.
I'll guide you back. That's how I see it.
I'm right with you, Ellen, right with you. And I think this is more, we've talked about prescriptive and descriptive, passages and concepts in both scripture and everywhere. Some things are prescriptive in that they're prescribing a way of life or a principle that we need to follow. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Okay, evergreen, prescriptive command. But other things are just describing what was going on in a certain place and time. Paul, right? Saying, women, keep your heads covered. Women, don't teach men. Women, keep your mouths shut. Those are descriptive, what was happening at a certain place in time culturally. And because of the situation that they were in, Paul was saying, don't rock the boat right now. That stuff can come later, but right now, just prepare for Jesus' return. So descriptive. And when I look at this, I'm looking at things that I consider prescriptive and things I consider descriptive. And when he's talking about offending God, I look at the way Ellen does. He said, if God really is love, absolute perfect love, then we really don't please him or offend him at all. God just is. We're going to get from God that perfect love every single time, because that's who and what God is. We anthropomorphize God. We make him out to have human traits, because then it's more relatable. And so we imagine God, and the scripture imagines God as being wrathful or offended and so on and so forth, because they're looking at the bad things that happened in their life, and that's how they make meaning out of that. But is that really describing the Godhead? Because in other places in scripture, Jesus being the prime example, but the Old Testament prophets as well describe a very different kind of God. This one who is unoffendable and understands what we are going through, and understands that we're moving from Bisha to Taba, from unripeness to ripeness. And everyone's somewhere along that spectrum. And some of us just are incapable of doing anything except Bisha stuff, unripe stuff, right? Immature stuff. So I'm right with you on that, Ellen. And that's one of the things, like I'm saying, just try to read through that. Take what you need and leave the rest, but there's so much here to take, that the things that we need to leave or just understand they were part of his culture really are in the noise. They don't change the main message from my point of view. And this last paragraph of this conversation, he told me that he had no scruples. Okay, everybody know what a scruple is? It's a doubt or a hesitation that you might have over something that may be that you're questioning the morality of, or questioning the proprietary of, appropriateness of an action. And so that would be your doubt, your hesitation. He had none of that. He had no doubt. He had no hesitation over the morality of anything, because anything that he did, because when I know I have failed, I acknowledge it and say, that is what I usually do when I'm left to myself. If I have not failed, I give thanks to God and acknowledge it is his doing. So he doesn't worry about this stuff. He knows he's going to mess up. It's just part and parcel to who he is, you know. Remember the story of the frog and the scorpion trying to cross the river? You know, and the scorpion says, I'll give you a ride. And the frog says, yeah, but you're just going to sting me. He said, no, I'm sorry. It's the scorpion that's getting a ride on the frog. You're going to sting me. No, because if I do, we're both going to drown. Get halfway across the river and the scorpion stings the frog. And as they're going down, he says, why did you do that? It's my nature. You know? So it's the same thing here. He has come to terms with his nature. He's going to mess up. And it doesn't bother him anymore because he knows his God understands. You know, and that's huge. And, you know, this idea of that when I have failed, that is what I do when I'm left to myself. If I've not failed, then it's because God has done it through me, basically. This is the same thing Jesus said when he said, I do nothing under my own initiative, right? He says, I only do what the Father does through me. Same idea here, right? That the goodness that we do, the love that we can show is all coming from that source that is the Father, that is God, that is the Mother, you know. Like we always, like I like to end my prayers, we love because he first loved us. Same idea. We're just vessels, we're conduits. The love of God is what's flowing through us. It doesn't initiate with us, is the idea here. It flows through us if we allow. Any more thoughts there?
He definitely has a low stress kind of don't worry, be happy kind of attitude about life. It sort of seems like just go with the flow, and I'm gonna mess up and it's okay, and I'm gonna still love God and God's still gonna love me. I mean, he's kind of, it's just very simple for him, it sounds like.
What if he's got it right?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we all worry so much about stuff that we probably don't really have to.
Well, I don't know that I would agree that he had an easy life.
Wait, say that again, John. It's hard to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know that that I would agree so much that he had it easy,
No.
but I think you would agree with that. But I think that he had a focused, very focused life, and he had one focus. It was simple, and it worked for him.
Mhm.
And you know, as he said, you know, if he says if he's left to himself, you know, says when I know that I've failed, I acknowledge it and say this is what I usually do when I'm left to my own devices. But then when he's not failed, he gives thanks to God and acknowledge that it is God's doing. And you know, I would add that you know, what left to my own devices, you know, I can be out there where the buses don't run, and God's got me. He's got his arms around me, and I'm covered. As long as my attitude is right, and I mean, I'm not doing anything wrong to harm anybody or to cause difficulty anywhere. But I know that God. I mean, it may offend some people. You know, that's okay. You know, those people are offendable. It's okay. But I do believe that when you know, when I haven't failed, you know, I do give thanks to God. And even when things have been, when I've gone through rough patches, I've always there's a passage that says, "Thank you for what you've given me, Lord. And thank you for what you've taken away, but thank you most for what you left." And I like that. That's kind of where I go with this.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes, it does. Absolutely.
Over and out, back to you in the studio.
Okay. All right. How about the third conversation? We're making some tracks here today. This is great. So next page, third conversation, November 22nd, 1666.
Wow.
He told me that the foundation of his spiritual life had been a high idea and esteem of God through faith, And once he had understood this, he immediately rejected entirely every other consideration that he might perform all his activities for the love of God. So the foundation of his spiritual life had been a high idea and esteem of God through faith. And once he had understood this, he immediately rejected entirely every other consideration that he might perform all his activities for the love of God. So he's getting single-minded here. That's the focus that John is talking about. You know, blinders on. He's single-minded with this, and all that other stuff and all those distractions, he's just tuning out. That when he had not thought of him, of God, for quite a while, he did not let it bother him. But after having acknowledged his wretchedness to God, he returned to him with even more confidence for having suffered such misery in forgetting him so. Okay, that's got to be sticking in some craws out there, right? Yeah. Okay.
I love it.
Let's take a look at this, you know. When he had not thought of God for quite a while, he didn't let it bother him, but after having acknowledged his wretchedness to God, he returned to him with even more confidence for having suffered such misery in forgetting him so. Okay, so he's acknowledging, instead of wretchedness, maybe we could just say he's acknowledging his frailty. Right? He's acknowledging his humanness, his brokenness. He's acknowledging his, human predilection to whatever it is that he's seeing as failure. Wretchedness has a different sound to us, but his frailty. And then he comes back and understands that he's going to be forgiven. He didn't even say that he asked for forgiveness. He just returns to the thought of God. So when he has let his mind wander, see, Jerry, this is where Stone Not Yet Smooth, right? When he lets his mind wander, when he's out in indulging in all the distractions and getting caught up in all the emotion of that for a period of time, he still just realizes that that's what's happening and brings himself back to the moment, brings himself back to God's presence. You know, how many times have we said, you know, if you've got a thought that's continuing to burrow a track in your brain, just as soon as you realize you're off there mind wandering on it, thinking about it, bring yourself back to the present moment. Don't try to push it away. That gives it more power. That gives it more fuel because you're now thinking about it again. It's refocused back onto the moment, back onto God's presence in the moment, and fill yourself up with that until it just gets displaced. There's no room for it anymore in your being. Just come back. And if you have to do that every 5 minutes all day long, you do it every 5 minutes all day long, because tomorrow it'll be 7.5 minutes and then 10 and so on and so forth. William?
I was thinking about this idea from Science and Non-Duality, one of their conferences that I was perusing online. They were sharing this thought that when we're connected to the divine, we feel a certain nourishment that comes from that. And that happens, of course, in the present moment. And when we're experiencing discomfort, when we're experiencing depression and uneasiness, they were suggesting that is the, how did they say it? The idea of like, it's like our universal consciousness that's calling us to return to a state of connection. And when we're I'm not wording this right. It's like, I think they said something like the pull of infinite consciousness on the finite mind is what the finite mind experiences as discomfort when it's disconnected from that. I know that was a little too esoteric, but that thought popped into my head.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yeah. You know, we're cut off from the source. And that's distressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I got the feeling that this was his act of contrition. You know, in Catholicism, when you go to confession, you pray an act of you give an act of contrition, and where it says he returned to him with more confidence, for having suffered such misery and forgetting himself.
Mhm.
And that's just what that says to me. And I like the change to frailty from wretchedness. I like that, Dave.
Mhm.
So here's one more concept. He doesn't let the times that his mind wanders off and he stops thinking about God for periods of time, doesn't let them bother him. And when I was reading someone who was talking about mindful presence and saying, you know, it's easy when you're trying to be mindful during the day and your mind keeps wandering off on all the laundry lists and all that stuff, right? That you get really frustrated with yourself and you start beating up on yourself and you just can't get it right. He said, instead of looking at it that way and blaming yourself as being subpar, he said, just look at each one of these as an opportunity to practice coming back to center, coming back to presence. It's actually another opportunity to practice. You know, it's like that 10,000 hours you're supposed to spend on something before you excel in it. You're getting closer to your 10,000 hours, the more times you have the opportunity to practice coming back to presence and back to center. It seems to be this is what Brother Lawrence is doing. He's not worried about it. He just knows this is what he's going to do left to his own devices. But when he comes back, and here's this last line is interesting. He returned to him with even more confidence for having suffered such misery in forgetting him. So why would you think that after he's messed up, you know, his mind has wandered off God for a period of time, that when he comes back, he has even more confidence in the relationship with God because he suffered such misery in forgetting God? Why would you think that would be the case?
The misery that he felt
Go.
was due to his basically not paying attention to his relationship with God. When he realized that he hadn't paid attention to his relationship with God, the fact that the misery was present was serving as evidence of how strong the relationship was. It served to remind him how much he did care and how much it meant to him. That's my take on it.
Mhm.
I'm right with you, Scotty. That's what I have in my note here in the margin. It's proof of love,
Mhm.
right? The fact that he was so miserable when he realized how far he had strayed from God's presence. It's proof of the love and the relationship. It's like when you grieve and mourn the bereavement of someone, some loss, some person, you know, the fact that you're mourning, blessed are those who mourn, right? They shall be comforted, is because there really was love there. There really was a relationship there. There was intimacy there that you're missing now. If you didn't have that, then you wouldn't be mourning that. And so I think this is that kind of grief or mourning that is the proof of his love and connection.
It helps me too, but back to how I started, that when I am in misery and when I am suffering, it is a wake-up call to me that God's just waiting for me to come back. That all I have to do is reach out and he's there. That so it gives me more confidence when I finally get around to remembering, oh yeah, all I have to do is connect again and I'll get out of this misery. It doesn't mean pain will immediately go away. Well, for me, immediately, but knowing that God is there and that God loves me and all I have to do is reach out. It gives me more confidence every time I reach out, and every time I turn to God, I get more confident.
Well,
And
it builds trust.
Yes, Patricia. Yes, it builds more and more trust in God for me.
And Patricia just said the magic word. She wins $100. And remember the old Groucho show? Say the magic word, win $100. Because in the next paragraph, I'm sorry.
It's a real relationship. If it's a real relationship, then you have to trust that you can't just do one bad thing and you're out. It's give and take. It's forgiveness. It's you come back. It's a give and take.
That's a great point, Kath. I love it.
Okay, I got a thought though, something I'm struggling with a little bit. you know, and it has to do with how we deal with our offendability. Like if say we get feedback from someone that we care about that is has been hurt or troubled by something that we said or did. I'm trying to figure out the best way to apply this notion. Is it, do I let go of thinking about that person's comment to me, just as, you know, your opinion of me is none of my business kind of deal?
No.
But do I think about and mourn potentially the disconnection that was present for the loved one in the moment, but let go of the grief and turn it over to God?
So Judy, you're talking about if you offended somebody else or hurt somebody else, and then
No, if I maybe it's a blind spot that I might have,
okay,
and someone that loves me speaks to how that that blind spot, whatever I said or did that was possibly spoken more harshly than I should have, or you know, my directness kind of cut a little too deep,
Right.
then I guess I'm trying to figure out the path that I take. I mean, it's I think in the past I have spent some time just thinking it through, you know, just seeing if there's a gem of truth in there for me to know how to love that person better, and wrestle with that for a little bit. But at the same time, I do take it to God, and I spend some time meditating and asking for guidance on the next indicated step. I mean, do I need to attempt a repair in the relationship, or
so is your question, how is that related to offendability?
yeah, I think
Okay.
so. I think so.
So if you're given constructive criticism or even unconstructive criticism, it's obviously not going to feel good, right?
Right.
But are you going to react then? Because that, once again, those are emotions that we don't have any control over. So that's not on us. You know, in
Right.
terms of that, that's what's going to come up when we hit a situation like that. But what do you do with that emotion? If you become defensive, if you try to kill the messenger, if you try to put the blame back on them, hey, well, you know, you think I did this, but look what you do. All of that stuff is about offendability.
Right.
It has to do with the type of behavior that is going to really destroy relationships. But if you take it in, it hurts, it doesn't feel good, but you listen to it and you consider it, and then you take what you need and leave the rest, you know, because a lot of times the criticism is not valid and you have to make that decision for yourself. But the fact that you actually listened to it and considered it, took it to God, that's not being offendable. That's actually doing the mature thing. That's regulating your emotions as you move through and not acting on them. When we talk about offendability, we're talking about, you know, people getting offended all the time and then acting out on their offenses in a way that's damaging to relationships, either in the micro or the macro. You made an art form out of being offendable, and we need to get back from that.
Yeah.
But no, it's not that you're not going to feel the sting. You're going to feel the sting, but you don't have to act on it in a offensive or even defensive way. That's, I think, the difference between the two. And use it as an opportunity to learn. What can I learn from this pain? Pain is the greatest motivator on earth. That's why people use it. You know, fear and pain motivates faster than anything. So let your pain motivate you in a positive way. Use it. What can I learn from this?
Mhm.
and that changes everything.
I've shared this here a couple times before that I learned in a weekend seminar. They had an exercise where we got feedback from everybody else in the classroom on how we handled something or a situation or a made up situation. And what we were invited to do when we got the feedback, especially if it was negative, is that before we responded or said anything or paid attention to the emotion that came with it, is to simply open a space and invite ourselves to ask ourselves the following question, which is, regardless of whether that person is right or wrong, what have I done to contribute to that person's feeling that way about that situation?
Mhm. That's my part. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's been a useful tool for me.
Yeah.
That's good, Scott.
Yeah. I
That's
would
real good.
agree. Yeah.
It also makes me think of Richard Rohr's mirroring concept.
Mhm.
Right.
Mm.
Just, and I like the way he explained it. Like if somebody's paying you a compliment, it feels good. But if the compliment is not true, you should still be able to distinguish between what's a genuine compliment and what's, you're blowing smoke up my ass kind of thing. And the opposite, when somebody's paying you a criticism,
Mhm.
you can take what's true out of the criticism and separate it from what's about them and what's about me.
Yes.
And we can be as grateful for that criticism as we are for the compliment.
Right.
And if we can get into that space, like Dave was saying, even if you're offended in that moment, and you can take responsibility for how you might have contributed or like how you might have showed up in that moment, the relationship doesn't even have to suffer, right? You can have a disruption and you can say, William, you're an idiot, and this is why you're an idiot. And if I can own that and be like, you know what, you're right, that was a dumb thing to do, and own it in that moment, I can still feel the sting of the criticism, like Dave says, but kind of use it as an opportunity to return to love in that moment, return to connection in that moment.
Mhm.
I'd like to add to that, when there's criticism that comes, after that, the sting of the moment, I've been instructed to think about what's going on with that person, and where did that come from that person. And if you sit back and not react to it, give yourself time to respond to it, that in that period of time, you can open yourself up to the thought of what's going on with that person, what's driving that person to do that stuff, or to say those things. And puts it in a much more interesting perspective for me.
And let's all also remember what it is that's being offended, right? It is the egoic mind's view of itself that's being offended. It's the chipping away at the self-narrative of who we think we are and this facade that we put out. When someone is chipping away at that, that's what it feels hurtful. That's what feels offensive. And I think as we practice unoffendability more and more, as we come more into terms with our own humility, I think we get to the point where there's less and less that is chipping away at our egoic sense of ourselves, because there isn't one anymore. We're pretty much being able to mirror straight through, as William was talking about, and the genuine person is coming out. And so I think it would be very difficult, for instance, to offend Brother Lawrence. Lawrence, you're an idiot. Well, of course I am. That's who I am. I'm an idiot. And anytime I don't act like an idiot, it's because God is acting through me. How do you offend somebody like that? And remember the old Desert Father story that I love to tell over and over again. The young monk comes to the elder and says, "What must I do to get closer to God?" He says, "Go to the cemetery and insult the dead."
Right.
So he goes out and does it, comes back. "Did you insult the dead?" "Yes." "Did they respond to you?" "No." "Now I want you to go back and praise the dead." So he's praising headstones, comes back. Did you praise the dead?" "Yes." "Did they respond to you?" "No." When you can respond to the insults and praises of men the way the dead do, then you're closer to the Lord. That's it. Can we learn to lose the stranglehold we have on our sense of self that we're working so hard to maintain, that everything offends us, and we have to defend ourselves and defend that sense of who we are. When that starts to fall away in that descent before the ascent, that's where we can actually get to a place of unoffendability.
Mhm. Gotcha. Okay.
With the unoffendability only being accomplished fully when
So-
we're dead.
One more time, William. what did
I
you
was
say?
saying, I was saying with the unoffendability only being accomplished fully when we're dead. Because it's a North Star we're shooting for, right? It's not something we'll ever reach in real time. Not while we're in this egoic
Mm.
Yeah.
state.
That reminds me of the prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi, like dying to the self. I never could get that. And I think you just said this, when we're dead, it's dying to the self. And I think now it's coming back into a picture. Dying to the self is that ego.
Yes,
No longer
Yes.
my ego.
yes.
It's yeah, okay.
When Jesus says, unless you're willing to pick up your cross daily, right? Pick up your cross daily, deny yourself, then you can follow me. That's the whole point. And Paul talks about, the death of the old man, right? Same idea here. We're not talking about a physical death. We're not talking about more mortifications. We're not talking about the Filipinos who literally nail themselves to crosses. Doesn't have to do with any of that. Has to do with death to self, in the sense of letting this egoic illusion, this construct, this construction of who we are and the way the world is, letting that go, letting it fall away, chip away at it until it's not there, so we can really see the real nature of our relationships. That's true humility. It's just seeing clearly who we are and how we relate to everyone else, including God. And once we're there, it gets pretty hard to offend. But like William says, the point at which we actually completely leave the ego is death. So yeah, the stone gets smooth at that point, and maybe not before. But that doesn't mean that it can't get smoother and smoother all the time. 51%. Remember, that's all we need is 51%.
That's right.
More often than not.
And I was making that comment, keeping in mind that Judy identifies as a perfectionist on the Enneagram. And it's like this idea of what that perfection looks like, it's a striving for.
Yeah.
Than something that you get to. And I also liked what you said earlier, Dave, about the peacemaker. Because when you mentioned peacemaker, I wasn't thinking of somebody coming in on the horse. I went to the Enneagram. And the idea that the peacemaker was the farmer who showed up every day and worked daily, right? Really has a different flavor, because the passion for the peacemaker on the Enneagram is sloth.
Is
right?
what now?
Sloth, laziness.
Oh, gotcha.
Right. So it's like this idea of showing up and putting in work daily, like a farmer, is the exact.
That's a good point.
That resonated nicely with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing how all of this stuff fits together when we actually get it back into the original context. And then you can see how it all works together, and how it really is doable for us. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but to get to that place of simplicity that's the descent part before the ascent. But we are so programmed to look for the spectacular. We are so programmed to be wanting to do these great things, because that feeds what the ego wants to believe about itself. But when we can let all of that go and get down to where Brother Lawrence is, where Jesus is, then things look very different from that point of view. We have Jesus saying, until you look at life from the standing height of a child, or from the kneeling height of a servant, you're not going to get what it is that I'm trying to serve up here. That perspective has to be lowered. And so it's so hard for us to do that, especially in this culture. Cool. Well, I think that's as far as we need go today. But just to validate Patricia, look at the next line, that the trust we put in God honors him greatly and draws down on us great graces. And so everything here is driving toward trust. And so that's why she got the $100. But just so you know, Patricia, that $100 is metaphorical. Okay?
Oh, shoot.
It's a metaphorical.
Offended me now,
$100.
Dave.
We don't want to
Since
over
we're doing
literalize
metaphor-
here.
Since we're doing metaphors, I'll raise it to 1,000.
Yeah, metaphorically, you can have any number you want. That's the beauty of it. This was another great conversation. I think that the conversations have been really terrific. This book, these last few weeks. So please, just keep throwing in, because that's where the magic really happens, and we get to hear all these different points of view. So great. All right, Scotty.
Thanks for joining us, buddy. As he clicks off real quick. Lord, thank you for having Vaughn here. Let him know he's loved and he's appreciated. And we thank you for the good report on our brother Bob, and just pray for his continued healing. Thank you for the things we learn as we share with each other and we study your word, and Dave's instruction and guidance and discernment and what these things mean, and all the help we receive when we open ourselves up to the fact that you are love, and your love is fully expressed in your creation towards us. All of this we're so grateful for, that we give our thanks and pray all these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen. All right.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody. And
Thanks, everybody.
guys.
See you Sunday.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Good night. Good night. See ya. Good night.
Yes,
Okay, Linda. See you Saturday.
yeah, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.